I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my mom told me the dog needed my bedroom. That was how my Saturday started. No, good morning. No, how did you sleep? Just my mother, barely looking up from buttering her toast, saying casually, "Your sister's dog has anxiety. He needs your room to feel safe." And from behind his newspaper, my dad chimed in, deadpan as ever, "Be grateful. We're letting you stay in the garage." I stared at the two of them, still groggy, wondering if this was some early morning joke I hadn't woken up enough to understand. But they weren't joking. Their faces were calm, settled, certain. Something inside me snapped, quietly, almost politely, but it snapped all the same. My name is Leslie Ferris. I'm 24 years old, and this is the story of how I went from the forgotten daughter to the woman who bought the house next door and waved at her parents every morning while sipping coffee on her porch, watching their dog bark at her from what used to be her bedroom window. But to understand how I got there, you need to know a few things about my family. My older sister, Zara, has always been the favorite, not in a dramatic movie villain way. No, my family preferred a slow kind of favoritism, a drip, drip, drip that eroded me over the years until I started questioning if I was imagining it. Growing up, Zara always got the new clothes. I got the hand-me-downs. She got the car on her 16th birthday. I got a lecture about insurance costs. When she broke a window with a baseball, I was the one told to apologize for distracting her. It was always like that. Small cruelties dressed as logic, favoritism disguised as practicality. I told myself it was because I was younger, or quieter, or more independent, whatever excuse made it easier to sleep at night. But deep down, I knew the truth. In our house, Zara could do no wrong, and I was just there, a background character in my own family. After college, I moved back home to save money while working as a junior designer at a local architecture firm. Rent was impossible, my student loans were breathing down my neck, and the spare room, my old room, had been empty since I left for school. It seemed reasonable, and for a while, things were fine. I paid rent, helped with groceries, fixed things around the house. I even repainted the deck last summer and unclogged the kitchen sink when no one else could be bothered. But then Zara moved back in temporarily. Temporary. That word should have been my red flag. Nothing in my family was ever temporary. She brought her Labrador, Toby, with her, a big, untrained, chaotic mess of fur who barked at anything that moved, chewed shoes into confetti, and seemed possessed by the urge to poop exclusively beside my car. Zara's explanation for all his behavior was always the same. "He's sensitive, Leslie. You don't understand him." And whenever Toby destroyed something of mine, Zara laughed it off. "Relax, he likes you." My parents shrugged. "You know how Zara is. Don't start drama." So I didn't. I tried to tough it out. I reminded myself it was only temporary. But the temporary weeks became months, and soon Zara converted the guest room into her personal gym/gaming cave. Toby roamed the house like he paid the mortgage. I worked long hours, tried not to complain, tried not to exist too loudly. And then came that morning. We were sitting at this kitchen table, eating breakfast like it was any ordinary day, when Mom delivered the news about Toby needing my bedroom. I blinked at her. "Wait, what?" "Toby's been stressed," she said gently, as if discussing a trauma survivor and not a dog who barked at ceiling fans. "He needs a quiet, safe space. Your room is the most isolated one. It'll help him regulate." "Regulate what?" I asked. "He's a dog." "That's insensitive," Zara's voice cut in as she entered, wearing my old sweatshirt like she owned the memory. She scooped cereal into a bowl and added, "You know he's been through a lot." I looked at her, at my parents, at the sheer absurdity of it all. "You're kicking me out of my room. For a dog?" Dad folded his paper with that slow, deliberate motion he used when he wanted to shut down a conversation. "We're not kicking you out," he said. "We're relocating you. The garage has plenty of space." The garage, where the walls were bare insulation, where the concrete floor froze in winter, where we stored boxes of old tax documents, rusted tools, and a treadmill that hadn't worked since I was 12. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. Mom waved a hand dismissively. "You'll be fine. You're young. It's just temporary." There it was again. Temporary. The lie they always told themselves to avoid feeling guilty. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry. I just stood up, walked to my room, and stared at everything that was supposed to be mine. Books on the shelf, sketches pinned to the wall, the bed I'd slept in through high school. And Toby followed me in, tail wagging triumphantly, like he knew he'd won something. I sat on my bed for a long time. Not angry, not sad, just tired. Years of being second choice pressed against my ribs. And then something inside me shifted, quietly, firmly. The next morning, I packed my things. No one helped. Zara barely noticed. My parents offered me a cot for the garage and a space heater. I smiled politely. Don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. I didn't move into their garage. I didn't stay another night under their roof. I crashed at a friend's place for a few days, scrolling Zillow until I found it. A tiny, worn-down, two-bedroom bungalow. Right next door. The irony was delicious. 3 weeks later, I moved in. And that first morning on my new porch, holding the same cheap coffee they drank, staring at the house that had never really been mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But peace in my family never lasts. Because while I rebuilt my life, they were preparing their next move, their next punishment, their next reminder that I was not supposed to rise. And the real story, the betrayal that would unravel everything, hadn't even begun yet. Buying a house at 24 wasn't something I ever imagined for myself. Buying the one next door to my parents, of all places, was even more unbelievable. But there I was, standing on the creaky porch of a rundown bungalow, holding a set of keys that felt heavier than they should. It was small, old, dusty, and completely, undeniably mine. The first week felt like shedding old skin. I worked during the day at the architecture firm, then came home and renovated until my arms ached. Painting, sanding, repairing, hammering. Every improvement I made to the house felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't know I'd lost. For once, nobody was telling me what to fix, how to fix it, or why it wasn't good enough. But peace never lasts long when your family is fueled by control. The first time I saw Zara strolling past my house with Toby, she paused just long enough to stare at me with that familiar blend of superiority and confusion, like I had personally offended her by daring to live on the same street. Toby barked as if he wanted to knock down my fence. Zara didn't flinch. She simply arched an eyebrow, smirked, and continued walking. A few days later, she stopped at the exact line where my lawn met the sidewalk. Toby squatted. Zara watched me the entire time through her oversized sunglasses. When the dog finished, she gave me a thin, satisfied smile and walked away. I cleaned it up myself. Not because I wanted to, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. Then came the wet cement incident. I had spent half a Saturday leveling and smoothing out a patch of sidewalk in front of the house. I was proud of it. Clean lines, perfect symmetry, the kind of job that would make my old design professor nod in approval. When I returned home later that evening, the surface was ruined. A trail of footprints wandered through the entire slab. Zara's size, Zara's pattern, Zara's carelessness. One deep drag mark even cut diagonally across the center, like she wanted to make sure the message was clear. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I poured another batch of cement and fixed it myself. I told myself that silence was stronger than letting her see me angry. But my silence only encouraged them. One Saturday morning, as I was staining a bench I had built from reclaimed oak, my gate opened. My mother stepped inside without knocking, without calling out, just walked in like she owned the rights to my space. "This is ridiculous," she said immediately, her tone drenched in accusation. I didn't turn around. "Good morning to you, too." "You bought a house," she continued, hands on her hips. "Right next door. What exactly are you trying to prove?" I finally stood, brush in hand. "Prove? Your father says you are making some kind of statement, sitting out here every morning drinking coffee like you're protesting." "I'm drinking coffee," I said, genuinely baffled. "Humans do that, Mom." "Zara told me you glare at her every time she walks by." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "She lets Toby bark at my door." "She's trying her best. He's sensitive. He still isn't adjusting. He misses your room." I blinked at her, speechless. "Are you seriously asking me to move out of my own house so the dog can sleep better?" "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "You kicked me out for that dog." "We offered you a space heater," she said, as if that solved everything. "I didn't need a heater," I said quietly. "I needed respect." Her face tightened, her eyes narrowing with that familiar disappointment that always blamed me for noticing the things they did wrong. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she said, "You've always been so sensitive." She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, the gate clicking shut behind her like a punctuation mark on a sentence I didn't get to write. After that, my father stopped acknowledging me entirely. If he saw me on my porch, he turned away. If I waved, he pretended not to notice. The rejection wasn't loud. It was surgical, precise. as if he had removed my presence from his life with a pair of scissors. Then came the gatherings I never heard about: birthday dinners, family barbecues, a full Thanksgiving celebration. Laughter drifted through my window while I sat alone with instant noodles. No invitation, not even a polite lie. They celebrated loudly, joy spilling into the street while pretending I didn't exist 20 feet away. But the worst moment came one evening as the sun dipped low behind the houses. I was on my porch sipping tea when a U-Haul pulled into my parents' driveway. For a moment, foolishly, I thought maybe Zara was moving out. Instead, she was moving in permanently. Boxes, gym equipment, suitcases, all carried inside with my father helping her like he was welcoming royalty. They laughed together, high-fiving between loads while Toby ran circles around their legs. And then I saw it. My old bed frame, the one I'd sanded and painted myself at 16, being wheeled straight into the garage. Then my old desk. Then the little shelf I built in high school woodshop. My childhood room had already belonged to the dog. Now my garage was becoming Zara's studio. The message came at 10:04 p.m. Since you're not using the garage anymore, Zara is going to convert it into a studio. She needs space to work on her projects. Let us know if you still have belongings in there. No greeting, no warmth. Just an administrative notice, like I was a tenant they wanted cleared out before the new one moved in. I sat on my living room floor and stared at the message until the screen dimmed. For the first time since I'd moved out, I felt something inside me fracture, not out of anger, but out of disappointment, so deep it felt like grief. For years, I had tried to earn a place in that family, tried to be helpful, responsible, easy. The daughter who didn't cause trouble, the daughter who fixed things and stayed quiet and swallowed her hurt. But some tables are built with only 3 chairs, and mine had never been one of them. I thought distance would free me. Instead, it only made room for the next wound. Because the real betrayal, the one that would take everything I thought I knew and crush it, arrived quietly the very next morning. A plain envelope, no return address, just my house number written in hurried handwriting. And inside it, the truth about what they were telling people about me. The envelope was thin, the paper inside folded twice, but somehow it felt heavier than anything I'd carried out of my parents' house. I stood on my porch barefoot, coffee mug in one hand, the morning air cold enough to sting my skin. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the uneasy slant of the letters almost felt like a warning. I opened it anyway. Leslie, I thought you deserved to know the truth before things go too far. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. The letter explained, carefully, almost apologetically, that Zara had been telling people I was unstable, that I'd lashed out, had a breakdown, and was now obsessively watching the family from the house next door. According to the letter, she'd even joked at a barbecue, one I obviously hadn't been invited to, that she worried I might snap one day. I felt my hands start trembling, not from anger, from humiliation. It sounded ridiculous, but also exactly like something Zara would do. She didn't confront people. She corroded them quietly. The letter ended with, "Your mom and dad agree with her. They've already started telling people you left over nothing and that your room was always meant for the dog. I thought you should know before your reputation takes the hit." I read it once, twice, a third time. By the 4th read, I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. I walked inside, locked the door, and shut every curtain. For a long time, I just stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, the letter limp in my hand. Toby barked from across the fence, a familiar sound that suddenly felt sharper, more personal. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after that. I told myself I needed time to think, to breathe, to process. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want anyone looking at me, wondering if the rumors were true, wondering if Zara and my parents were right. I turned off my phone, ignored texts, let emails pile up. Hours blurred together. Sometimes the only sound in my house was Toby barking through the wall or the faint hum of the refrigerator. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at nothing, replaying every moment where maybe, just maybe, I'd given them ammunition without realizing it. I had always been proud of my work, proud of my ambition, proud that I was on track to get my architectural license. I had friends. I had momentum. I had a future. And yet here I was, hiding in my own home, terrified that everyone I knew now pictured me as some unhinged woman glaring out the window, plotting revenge over a bedroom. It was ridiculous. It was humiliating. It was working. 3 days later, at 3 a.m., I opened the fridge and realized I hadn't eaten a real meal in almost 48 hours. I grabbed a container of leftover pasta, sat on the cold kitchen floor, and ate it straight from the container. No dramatic tears, no meltdown, just a hollow ache spreading through my chest as I stared at the microwave I still hadn't bothered to fix. That was my rock bottom, not the garage, not the dog, not the rumors. It was sitting there on the floor, eating cold pasta, feeling like my family had finally taken something from me I couldn't identify or name. But rock bottom is a strange thing. Sometimes it feels like a trap. Sometimes it feels like a turning point. For me, it was both. The next morning, I didn't feel better, not even a little, but I did something small. I took out the trash. Then I washed the dishes, showered, shaved, brushed my hair for the first time in days. Small, quiet actions that didn't fix my heart, but reminded me I still existed in my own body. I went to work. No one looked at me strangely. No one whispered. The world hadn't collapsed while I was hiding. In fact, it didn't seem to notice I'd vanished at all. Maybe my family had told their story, but not everyone believed it. Not everyone cared. And that tiny sliver of relief cracked the fog around me, just enough for light to slide in. That week, I started running again. 1 mile at first, then 2. I fixed the microwave, repaired the loose railing on the porch, reorganized all my tools in the shed, called my old college roommate and talked for an hour, actually laughed. Then came the moment that changed everything. I opened my laptop to search for something completely unrelated, and the AutoCAD file I'd abandoned during my spiral was still open, the one inspired by an old childhood photo of me at 10 years old, holding a hand-drawn neighborhood map. I stared at the lines, the shapes, the potential. And suddenly, without planning to, I started sketching. Not a house, a garden. My front yard was nothing special. Patchy grass, overgrown shrubs, a crooked tree that leaned toward my parents' fence. But I saw something there. Something I could shape, something that could belong only to me. Every day after work, I put on gloves and worked until sunset, digging out weeds, hauling in soil, installing pavers, building a water feature from salvaged stone, planting lavender, hydrangeas, Japanese maples. The transformation was slow, sweaty, exhausting, and healing. When the garden finally bloomed into something undeniably beautiful, people began to stop on the sidewalk to compliment it. Neighbors I didn't even know walked past and said, "Wow, did you do this yourself?" One even asked, "Are you an architect?" "Almost," I told them with a smile. Word spread faster than I expected. My boss stopped by to drop off a set of plans and ended up walking my whole yard, nodding thoughtfully before saying, "You ever consider landscape design on the side?" It wasn't a serious suggestion, but it planted a seed. And like everything else I'd planted recently, it began to grow. One afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, I heard someone clear their throat. I turned, expecting a neighbor. It was my father. He stood stiffly at the edge of the lawn, arms crossed. "That's a nice setup you've got," he said. I didn't stop trimming. "Thanks." A long silence stretched between us. "Your mother wants to know if you'll come by for dinner sometime." I looked up at him. "Why? So we can pretend everything's fine?" He didn't flinch. "Because she misses you." "And you?" I asked. He hesitated. "It's been quiet." I let the silence stretch again before answering. "I'll think about it." I meant it too, just not for the reasons he hoped. I didn't crave their approval anymore. I didn't need to be seen by them to feel real. Because by then I had learned something. The more they tried to erase me, the more I rebuilt myself somewhere they couldn't reach. But Zara wasn't done, not even close. And her next move, her quiet, poisonous, calculated move, would change everything. It's strange how rebuilding your life can happen quietly, without anyone noticing, until suddenly they do, and the whole world shifts. That's how it felt when the email arrived. A simple subject line, proposal, side project opportunity, sent by someone I didn't know. At first I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam or another scam promising exposure. But something about it caught my eye. The sender's name, Leona Kim, a partner at a boutique development firm in the city. I opened the email and reread it twice. She had seen my landscaping design. Apparently, a neighbor had posted before and after photos of my front yard online and credited me in the caption. Leona said she was searching for someone with a design-forward mind to consult on a new series of residential infill projects. Outdoor entertaining spaces, garden layouts, entryway redesigns. Small things at first, but the kind of things that could grow. But the sentence that struck me hardest was the one she wrote near the end. "We're drawn to designers who turn limitations into statements. Your work has a kind of defiant beauty." Defiant beauty. I must have whispered those words a dozen times. I replied immediately. We scheduled a meeting, and for the first time in months, I felt anticipation instead of dread. When we met for coffee a few days later, I brought my sketches, not just the ones from my garden, but concept pieces I'd worked on for fun. Rooftop gardens, multi-use patios, even a repurposed garage turned into a greenhouse art studio hybrid. Leona's eyes lit up at that one. Funny, she said. We have a client who literally asked for something like this. By the end of the meeting, I was consulting on 2 projects. Paid, credited, trusted. It wasn't full-time, but it didn't have to be. It was validation in its purest form. My creativity mattered. And more importantly, I had leverage now. A life outside of my parents' shadows. A network that saw me, not Zara, as the one with potential. It was time to use that. So I started attending family events again. Not because I wanted reconciliation, not because I missed them, because I wanted proximity. The next time my mother texted an invitation for Sunday dinner, I said yes. I dressed well, walked in confident, steady, controlled. I brought a bottle of wine they couldn't afford but would pretend to enjoy, because appearances mattered more to them than honesty ever did. Zara's face when I walked in was priceless. Eyes wide, jaw tight, a flicker of something brittle flashing across her expression before she rearranged it back into smug neutrality. Mom greeted me like nothing had ever happened. Dad nodded stiffly. Zara said nothing. You look different, Mom said. I've been working on myself, I replied, my tone even, and on a few houses. Houses? She repeated, glancing at Dad. Design consulting, I said casually. Landscape architecture. It's new, but going well. I watched the words ripple across the table like a dropped stone. Zara stiffened slightly. Dad blinked. Mom tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. Dinner was stiff. They asked polite questions. I offered polite answers. When Zara tried to dominate the conversation the way she always did, I didn't push back, just listened, nodding occasionally, studying her reactions. But every now and then, I asked a question that landed like a soft dart. How's the job search going? Still bunking at home? Thought you were only staying a month. Must be nice having so much free time. I bet Toby loves it. She flinched at each comment. Small, barely noticeable, but there. I didn't need to attack her. I just needed her to know that I wasn't the timid, silent shadow she remembered. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was reconnaissance, mapping the terrain before the real battle. Over the next month, I showed up more. A birthday gathering, a casual dinner. Dropping off a borrowed book I never actually borrowed. I was polite, charming even, helpful. The daughter they always wished Zara had been. I fixed their broken gate latch, repaired a step on the porch, brought over muffins I didn't bake. Zara hated every second of it. She snapped at me once, something petty about the way I folded hand towels, but Mom brushed it off as teasing. I saw the panic behind her eyes, though. She felt me gaining ground. And then the perfect opening appeared. One night after dinner, everyone else drifted off to bed. Zara and I were left in the kitchen loading dishes. She was tipsy from the 2 beers she'd chugged to get through the evening. Funny, she muttered, slamming a plate into the dishwasher. How everyone suddenly acts like you're the golden child. I wiped a glass slowly. I'd just show up, Zara. You'd be surprised how much that changes. She snorted. You're acting like you're better than me now, just because you bought a shack and planted some flowers? Hey, I said calmly, don't knock the flowers. They've done more for me than this family ever did. Her jaw flexed. She wanted to snap, wanted to tear me down the way she always had. Instead, I smiled, set the glass aside, and said softly, Anyway, thanks for doing the dishes. Must be exhausting carrying all that resentment. I walked out before she could respond. And a week later, the offer arrived. Leona's firm wanted me to take the lead on a hillside property design. Full layout, full control, a dream project. More than that, it was located 1 town over, right near where Zara had been planning to move. I toured the site with the project team, reviewed their blueprints, and made a suggestion. There was an unused commercial space being converted into studios and offices. It would be perfect for a design studio. They loved the idea, so I rented one of the units, registered my LLC, and began building Defiant Green. A studio built on the foundation of every time I'd been told to shrink. I took photos of my projects, especially my front yard, and posted them online, created a website, shared my story with carefully chosen vulnerability. Not lies, never lies, just truth framed with clarity. And then the journalist got wind of it, and the article went live. The headline read, Building from the Ashes, How One Designer Turned Family Friction into Functional Art. Zara read it, I know she did. Because the next morning, she stormed into my studio. Did you seriously tell people I kicked you out for a dog? She hissed. I looked up from my desk, calm as still water. I never mentioned your name. You didn't have to. Everyone knows. She was trembling, not with anger, but with fear. Now everyone thinks I'm some monster, she spat. The girl who stole her sister's room for her dog. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. I thought you were the girl who needed a garage for her projects. Her hands curled into fists. You humiliated me, she said. No, I replied softly. You did that all on your own. I just stopped covering for you. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I didn't chase her, because she wasn't my responsibility anymore. And because I wasn't done. Not even close. The strange thing about momentum is that once it starts rolling, it doesn't care who gets caught underneath it. Zara had spent years crafting a version of reality where she shined and I stayed small, where her chaos was excused and my silence was weaponized. But once the truth began slipping into the open, once people saw even a fraction of what she'd done, the story she'd built around herself started to crumble. And I didn't have to push. All I had to do was stand still. The unraveling began at the community event in the town square, a casual open-air fair meant to spotlight local businesses and showcase upcoming development projects. Leona's firm had a booth, and she invited me to join her at the last minute. If she'd known the history between my family and me, she might have understood why that invitation felt like handing a match to someone standing in a field of dry grass. But all she saw was talent and potential. So I said yes, without hesitation. The event was bustling. Kids eating snow cones, couples strolling arm in arm, retirees wandering with tote bags full of free brochures. City council members floated around with polite smiles plastered to their faces. And then, of course, Zara. She arrived with a friend from her gym, wearing a designer jacket she absolutely couldn't afford, and pulling Toby, who dragged her around like she had no spine. She wasn't there to support the community. She was there to be seen. And when she finally spotted me behind the defiant green banner, her entire face stiffened. Her friend whispered something. Zara's eye twitched. Toby barked once at my display board like he knew exactly whose side he was on. I smiled at her. A small, polite wave, barely a gesture, but enough. I turned back to the crowd gathering around our booth as Leona motioned for me to begin the presentation. My heart thudded once, hard, before settling into a steady beat. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I felt grounded, balanced, ready. I walked them through my designs, before and after photos, sketches, 3D renderings. People nodded, murmuring to each other, pointing at the transformation of my front yard with genuine interest. Leona stepped aside, letting me take the stage. Then came the question that shifted everything. A councilwoman named Tessa, sharp, imposing, the kind of woman who could make a room hush with a single lift of her eyebrow, leaned forward and asked, Leslie, what inspired you to start your own practice? I smiled, because the answer was simple. Honestly, I said, a garage. A few people chuckled. They thought it was a joke, but I didn't look away from Zara. Her expression flickered. Annoyance, confusion, fear. I was asked, I continued, to give up my bedroom so the family dog could have a better space. I was told I should be grateful to move into the garage. Someone in the crowd gasped softly. So I left, I said, bought the house next door, and every decision since then has been about turning disrespect into design, turning noise into purpose. Silence followed, a long, weighted silence. Then applause, soft at first, then growing until it rolled through the square like a wave. Zara stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her cheeks blotched red, her jaw clenched. She yanked Toby's leash so hard he whimpered. Then she walked away, stiff-backed, wounded pride trailing behind her like a torn ribbon. The unraveling had begun. Within days, the whispers spread. People who had once brushed past me at neighborhood events now greeted me like an old friend. Someone mentioned seeing my garden online. Another congratulated me on the article. People talked about my work, my creativity, my independence. And then came the comparisons, soft ones at first. Leslie's so talented. She's doing amazing, did you hear? She built that entire front yard herself. Then, Zara still doesn't have a job? She's living with her parents again? Her dog chewed up the community flower bed, did you hear? The same neighbors who once nodded politely at Zara now avoided her. One woman even walked across the street to avoid Toby. It wasn't intentional cruelty, just the natural shift that happens when people finally see what's been in front of them all along. My mother showed up at my studio 2 days later with a casserole container so hot she had to juggle it between her hands. "I just want us all to be okay again," she said, forcing a smile. Her eyes darted around the studio, absorbing the proof of my independence, my success, my voice. "We were never okay," I said gently. "You just weren't looking." She left the casserole. I threw it out. It tasted too much like guilt. My father came next, but he came differently. For the first time in my memory, he knocked. He stood on my porch with his hands clasped behind his back, hat in hand, gazing at me with something I'd never seen on his face before. "Regret. I owe you an apology," he said. "I let your sister run wild and expected you to pick up the slack. I should have protected you." I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. He had broken something. He couldn't unbreak it, but at least he saw it now. "You're a better woman than I ever gave you credit for," he added softly. "Maybe better than me." We sat together on the porch in silence, the heavy kind that feels less like tension and more like truth. He didn't ask for absolution, and I didn't offer it, but for the first time in years, we were honest with each other. Zara, however, didn't recover. She tried making a YouTube channel about dog training. Toby shredded her filming setup in the first week. She took a warehouse job and quit after 3 weeks. She couch hopped. She blamed everyone but herself. I heard she even tried to join a local influencer house. They turned her down. But her downfall wasn't what satisfied me. I didn't feel joy watching her spiral. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt detached, like someone watching a story unfold on a screen instead of living inside it. Because my life was no longer defined by her. Meanwhile, Defiant Green took off. Leona trusted me with more projects. I hired my first assistant, Claire, a brilliant grad student who absorbed knowledge like sunlight. We partnered with a real estate group to design eco-conscious outdoor spaces, my studio filled with sketches, models, plants, possibility. And finally, on the 1-year anniversary of moving into my home, I hosted a small gathering. Nothing elaborate, just people who mattered. Friends, neighbors, colleagues. Even Tessa from the council stopped by and gifted me a bonsai tree. As the sun set, painting my yard in warm gold, I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee. The same porch where I'd once sat feeling small and erased. The same porch where I'd begun to reclaim my life. I looked toward my parents' house. The window that once framed Toby barking at me every morning was empty now. No dog, no sister, no chaos. Just silence, just space, just peace. A neighbor walked by and waved. I waved back, feeling the subtle, quiet joy of a life built deliberately, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what I had lost. Because I had built something better, something grounded, something mine. Sometimes revenge isn't loud or cruel or dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet life no one can take away from you. If you had told me a year earlier that peace, not victory, not applause, not revenge, would be the thing that finally soothed the raw parts of me, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I thought justice had to be loud. I thought I'd need some dramatic confrontation, some confession, some apology carved into stone. But peace is quieter. Peace sneaks up on you. It settles into the walls you rebuilt with your own hands. It lingers in the garden you shaped out of soil and stubborn hope. It hums in the silence left behind when chaos finally moves out of earshot. For weeks after the community fair, life took on a new rhythm. I wasn't waiting for the next blow, the next rumor, the next accusation. I wasn't looking over my shoulder or bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. I woke up with purpose instead of dread. I wasn't driven by fear anymore. I was driven by momentum. Work grew busier in the best way. Projects overlapped. Consultations filled my calendar. Claire, my assistant, began taking on more responsibility, her confidence growing every week. Sometimes I'd catch her humming while she drafted plans or arranged samples, and each time it made my studio feel less like a workplace and more like a living thing, a space that breathed and moved and expanded with us. My parents kept their distance. My father occasionally sent a text, short, awkward, but sincere. My mother didn't reach out much at all. I wasn't angry anymore, not really, just removed, like we were planets that had drifted too far apart to ever share the same orbit again. And Zara? I didn't hear from her, but I heard about her. A friend of hers mentioned she'd tried to start a dog training business. Toby chewed through her first client's shoes during the assessment session. That ended that. Another rumor said she'd attempted a lifestyle blog but abandoned it after 2 weeks when she couldn't figure out how to edit videos. She was spiraling, yes, but not in a way that brought me satisfaction. Her downfall didn't fill me with triumph. It didn't soothe anything inside me. Instead, it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Her life had been built on scaffolding, propped up by attention and excuses and unearned reassurance. And when that scaffolding finally toppled, she didn't know how to stand on her own. I did, and maybe that was the real difference between us. One crisp morning, several weeks after the fair, I stepped outside with my usual cup of coffee. The air smelled like autumn, damp leaves, early chill, that faint whisper of winter waiting its turn. I wrapped my arms around myself and breathed deeply. Across the fence, the window that had once been my bedroom sat dark and still. No barking, no movement, just silence. A year ago, I would have stared at that window and felt hurt, anger, maybe even grief. Now all I felt was gratitude, because that window wasn't my past anymore. It wasn't my prison. It wasn't my reminder of everything I wasn't allowed to be. It was just a window, and I had walked out of it. I wandered toward the garden, brushing my fingers through the lavender I'd planted months before. Dew had collected on the petals, tiny droplets sparkling like glass beads. The water feature burbled quietly, steady and calm. A little sanctuary, my sanctuary. And for the first time, I realized I didn't build this to spite anyone. I didn't build it to prove a point. I built it because I deserved a space that reflected who I was becoming. Because sometimes choosing yourself looks like leaving. Sometimes it looks like starting over. And sometimes it looks like a garden where there used to be a patch of dirt no one cared about. Later that day, Claire came into the studio clutching a set of rolled-up plans, her ponytail bouncing. "You're going to want to see this," she said, grinning. I unrolled the blueprint across the drafting table. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. A new development layout, a series of small commercial spaces, pedestrian-friendly paths, and a green roof design proposal. Then I saw it. In the lower right corner, defiant green, lead designer, Leslie Ferris. My breath caught. "This is real?" I asked softly. "Very real," Claire said. "They want you on the approval board for the entire project." I traced my fingers along the lines of the blueprint, the elegant sweep of the walkway, the clusters of trees I'd sketched, the shading I'd added for depth. My name looked strange there, beautiful, whole, earned. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the studio. The evening light filtered through the windows, bathing everything in gold. My tools lay scattered across the desk. My sketches hung on the walls. Plants sat clustered in corners, catching the last of the sun. This wasn't just a business. It wasn't just a studio. It wasn't just a comeback. It was proof that I hadn't imagined the neglect, proof that I hadn't deserved it, proof that I could build something strong from the foundation of everything that tried to break me. What remained of my anger evaporated. What remained of my hurt softened around the edges. I didn't need Zara to apologize. I didn't need my mother to understand. I didn't need my father to atone. I had outgrown the version of myself who needed their approval. On the anniversary of my move, I sat once again on my porch with a freshly brewed cup of coffee. The sky glowed with the warm colors of dusk, streaks of orange and rose melting together. A neighbor passing by waved. I waved back. The moment felt simple, perfect, grounded. I glanced at the empty window across the fence. Then I smiled. Not because they were gone, not because I had won, but because I had finally stepped into a life that felt like my own. Sometimes revenge is satisfying. Sometimes vindication feels sweet. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is peace. Quiet, steady, unshakable peace. And that's what I chose for myself. Stop looking back. Start building forward. And so I did.